Have you ever wondered if everything you've been told about God and the afterlife is actually true? What if what exists on the other side is far greater and more liberating than any religion has dared to teach? In today's video, you'll learn the true story of Rachel Morgan, who died for 3 minutes and returned with a shocking revelation about the church's biggest hoax. Like, subscribe to the channel, and comment here which city you're watching from. My name is Rachel Morgan. I'm 38 years old and I was born in Tucson, Arizona. I grew up in the pews of a fundamentalist evangelical church. My father was a pastor, my mother a worship leader. The Bible was our only reading material. Heaven and hell, salvation and damnation. God was a severe judge, and Jesus, the savior of the repentant. Everything I knew about spirituality was shaped by walls of fear and promises of glory until the day I died. It was supposed to be a simple surgery, gallbladder removal. I was healthy. Everything was under control. They put me on the stretcher, smiled at me, and told me everything would be fine. The last thing I remember was the anesthesiologist saying, "Count to 10. I didn't even make it to 3. In what felt like a snap, I found myself outside my body, floating. Above the room, I saw the doctors rushing in, my heart having stopped for almost 3 minutes. But I didn't feel panic. I felt nothing, until I felt everything. I was sucked upward by an invisible force, as if space itself were swallowing me. And then, the tunnel, a corridor made of living, pulsating light, as if every particle there knew my name. I was pulled by love, not gravity. At the end of the tunnel, there was something, someone, but it wasn't the vengeful God of the sermons. It wasn't the golden throne, the angels with swords, or the books of judgment. It was a presence, immense, silent, and utterly loving. And when this presence enveloped me, I wept, but not out of sadness. I wept because I understood everything. The truth there was raw, clear, and devastating. The religion I was taught was just a distorted shadow of divine reality. God was not an old man with a beard, nor a ruthless judge. He or she was pure consciousness, pure love. There was no punishment, no sin, as I was told. Only evolution, only learning, and all religions, like loose pieces of a puzzle no one has finished, including mine. There, I knew. We've been deceived. All of us. The church has taken the truth and squeezed it until fear remains. Fear of living, fear of loving, fear of making mistakes. And this fear imprisons us. But on the other side, everything is freedom. As I started back, I screamed. Literally, my spirit wouldn't leave. I cried like a child ripped from its mother's arms. But a soft voice told me, "It's not over yet. You have to tell me." And that's what I'm doing. I remember the exact moment I realized that was not a dream. I wasn't delirious, nor was I hallucinating from the anesthesia. This was real, more real than anything I've ever experienced here on Earth. The sensation was so vivid, so penetrating, that my human mind seemed too small to contain it all. The tunnel I was floating through seemed endless, but it wasn't dark. It was bathed in a white light, intense but not blinding. It pierced me, as if cleansing me of centuries of accumulated fear, guilt, and ignorance. And with every meter, I got closer to that brighter glow at the end. I felt something shift within me. I was remembering something I always knew, but had been taught to forget. And then too heard, but not with my ears. It was as if the light itself spoke to me, directly into my consciousness. It said, "You have been conditioned to believe in a separate God, in a heaven that only a few deserve, in a truth that only the chosen know. But all of this was invented by men. Truth is free." These words vibrated within me like a silent earthquake. My heart, if I still had one, opened like a flower. I saw, in flashes, all the times I'd questioned my faith and been silenced, all the times I'd doubted the rigidity of doctrine and been called a rebel. But there, doubt was a portal. Doubt brought me here. It was at this point that I began to see images. They weren't visions like in a dream, but vivid projections, as if I were inside each one. I saw a pulpit, a pastor shouting about hell while inside. He doubted every word he said. I saw a woman praying with guilt, believing she was dirty, unworthy, just for loving someone of the same sex. I saw a child crying in a church pew, thinking that God hated him for having wrong thoughts. And then I saw thousands, Millions of people walking with invisible chains. Chains made of doctrines, dogmas, rules. Chains that religion itself tied in the name of God. It was at that moment that the presence spoke again. The church taught fear, but love doesn't need threats to be lived. I fell apart. I felt like everything I believed in was a house of cards being blown away by a breath of light. I had always believed in God, but I didn't in that God. And now, for the first time, I truly knew him. It was impossible to go back to being the same. But at that moment, I didn't yet know that the most shocking thing was yet to come. When I realized where I was, my first impulse was to expect judgment. Yes, judgment. Because that's what I'd been taught my entire life, that after death would come the white throne, the books opened, sins displayed one by one, like a heavenly court where every thought would be scrutinized. I expected shame. I expected some higher entity to confront me about my mistakes. The times I'd lied, the harsh words I'd said to my mother, the forbidden desires I'd hidden from the church. I'd prepared myself internally for this, but did not happen. There was no accusation. There was no charge. There was no list of sins. There was only one mirror, but not a physical mirror. It was as if I were looking into my own soul, naked, transparent. I saw my actions, yes, but not with guilt. I saw with understanding. I saw that everything I'd done, the good, the bad, the disastrous, was born of my pain, my ignorance, my fear, and I saw that even in the worst choices, there was a legitimate search for love, for acceptance, for meaning. In that dimension, there was no conviction. There was learning. Every mistake was an unfinished lesson. Every suffering, a seed of empathy. And even more surprising, no one judged me. The only person who could judge me was myself. But there, even that lost its meaning, because the only thing that made sense was love. A presence enveloped me again. I could see no form, no face, no gender, but I felt clearly, this was what we call God. And he or she gave me a message so powerful that I nearly imploded. Sin is not a crime. It is just a choice that has forgotten love. I cried. I cried for everything. I cried for believing in a deity that hated me, for kneeling so many times asking for forgiveness for being human, for denying my own heart to please a theology made by men. And then, out of nowhere, I felt the pain of all humanity, an eternal second of pure compassion. It was as if I were connected to all souls. And there I understood. We are one, we are fragments of the same whole trying to remember who we are. The hell the church preached, it was just accumulated guilt. A state of mind, not a place. Heaven, it wasn't a reward. It was a recognition. And God was much more of a mother than a father, much more of a hug than a pointing finger. It was at that moment that I realized I would never fit back into the box of religion, and maybe I wouldn't even come back. Soon after this devastating and liberating revelation about judgment, I began to realize I was not alone. The divine presence that had been welcoming me now seemed to gently push me away, as if to say, now it's time to see more. And it was then that all around me, shapes began to appear, people, souls, but they weren't in bodies. They were like outlines made of light, but I knew exactly who they were. One by one, those presences began to approach. The first one I recognized was my maternal grandmother, Evelyn. She passed away when I was 14. I never got over her death, and I never accepted that she hadn't gone to heaven, according to church rules. She smoked. She drank a glass of wine every night, and she didn't attend church services. My father's theology said she was lost, but there, she shone. She looked at me, not with her eyes, but with her heart. And what I felt was unconditional love, a love so pure it brought my soul to its knees. She didn't speak with words, but her gaze said, "Now you understand, my girl, no soul is lost." Others came, a cousin who took his own life at 17, an ex-boyfriend who died in a motorcycle accident, and even a man I had hated in my life. Yes, hated. He had harassed me when I was a teenager. And there, on the other side, he appeared, but not as the monster of my memory, but as a fragmented, broken, regretful soul, in the process of healing. That's when I heard the phrase that cut my soul like a lightning bolt. On earth, you are divided by judgment. Here, we are united by truth. I understood, in that instant, that no human being is frozen in their worst version. Here, we can live trapped in traumas and masks. But there, everyone is in constant transformation. Nothing is definitive, not even pain. I also saw people from other cultures, other religions, and even people who had never believed in God. And to my complete shock, everyone was being welcomed in the same way, without distinction. Catholics, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, all were part of the same consciousness. Some more awakened, others still in process, but none were rejected. None went to hell. The dogma I'd been taught as a child was crumbling before my eyes. The theology of us versus them, saved versus lost, saints versus sinners. It was an illusion created by fear. There, for the first time, I understood. What we call heaven is a state of unity, and it begins when you stop dividing the world into right and wrong, pure and impure, believer and heretic. And in that moment, I didn't want to go back, but something even more profound was about to happen. After meeting those beloved souls and others I never imagined I'd meet again, I was guided by an invisible energy, as if an inner compass gently nudged me. I was taken to a new place, and there are no human words sufficient to describe what I saw. It was like entering a room made of pure consciousness. There were no walls, but there was form. There was no electric light, but everything glowed. It was as if the space itself was alive, breathing, sensing me. And in the center, a vortex, a presence that seemed to gather all that exists, a universal mind, a heart that pulsed love in every direction. When I entered it, I simply, you knew, this place does not belong to any religion. It was a space of absolute truth, not the truth of men, not that of books, nor that of dogma. It was the truth that transcends words, creeds, and sacred names, and I was flooded by it. Within seconds, I was shown something devastating. Religions are not the truth. They are attempts, maps drawn by human hands trying to explain the inexplicable. And then, an image formed before me. I saw great religious leaders throughout history, priests, pastors, rabbis, monks, some sincere, some manipulative, some seeking God, others seeking power, all talking about a God they never touched. They didn't lie because they were bad. They lied because they were also lost. That phrase echoed within me. It was like a whisper from the very core of the universe, and I understood. The greatest hoax is not that God does not exist, but that anyone here on earth can say they understand him completely. I saw churches built on fear, temples built on guilt, doctrines born of the need for control, and most of all, I saw millions of people kneeling every day, not out of love, but out of fear of eternal punishment. And that was the hardest moment of my experience. Realize that the religion that raised me, that shaped my childhood and my morals, also imprisoned me. And then came the final revelation from that room. You were called a rebel, but really, you were just waking up. I cried like never before. I cried for all the times I felt wrong for questioning, for all the times I wanted to leave a service, but stayed out of guilt, for all the times I thought, this doesn't make sense, and was called weak in faith. At that moment, I forgave myself. And then I felt something shift. The vibe around me began to transform. The feeling was clear. I would have to go back. But now, with a mission I never imagined I would carry, the news that I would have to return hit me like a punch to the soul. It was like leaving the safest, purest embrace ever. I remember thinking, why show me all this, just to send me back? But then, without words, the answer came straight to my heart. You saw, because now you need to remind others. It was at that moment that I understood. My NDE was not a fluke. It was not a medical error. It was a calling to break with everything I believed to be absolute truth and start living the truth that I felt. In that place of light, there was no need to preach, convince, or indoctrinate. Wisdom was transmitted like waves, vibrations, and what I received was something I will never forget. The earth is suffocated by voices that claim to know, but you were marked to be one whole listen. Then I saw, in vivid visions, what would happen if I ignored this call. I saw an unhappy Rachel, trying to pretend nothing had happened, trying to return to the services, the rituals, the repeated words, but her eyes were filled with emptiness, a ghost of herself. And I also saw the opposite, the Rachel who spoke out, who exposed what she saw, who faced judgment, the pointing of fingers, the labels of deviant, blasphemous, deceived by the devil, but who stood firm, because the light she brought from there, no one else could erase it. I was marked, invisible marks, but as real as any scar. I carry that vibration within me to this day, and from that moment, I knew religion needed to be confronted, not out of hatred, but out of love for truth. I realized that the fear that churches plant, hell, damnation, the idea that only ours will be saved, serves only one purpose: control. Emotional, psychological, spiritual control. That light, that God that enveloped me, had no name. It was not Jehovah, nor Allah, nor Brahman, nor Jesus. It was everything. It was pure I am. It was living energy, omnipresent, indescribable. And at that point, I was told the last sentence before saying goodbye. Don't convince them. Just tell them. Whoever is ready and will remember. It was then that I felt a force pulling me back. A reverse vortex. I screamed. I struggled. I cried. But it was no use. I was going back. Going back never seemed so cruel, but I knew. My mission began there. Coming back was like falling. A slow but brutal fall. Like plummeting from a mountaintop into a dark room. My spirit felt too big for that frail body. The first thing I felt was heaviness. Yes, the weight of the matter, of flesh, of gravity, of time. It was suffocating after I experienced what it was like to be pure being, pure consciousness, pure love. When I opened my eyes in the recovery room, everything seemed small. The ceiling, the cold light, the mechanical noises of the machines. I looked around like someone waking up from a deep coma and no longer recognizing anything. The nurses were there, smiling, relieved. But me, I wanted to scream, because no one there had any idea what I had just seen. The doctor said, "Rachel, everything went well. You slept longer than expected, but you're fine." Little did she know that I'd died, and back with too many secrets to fit in my mouth. The next few hours were the strangest of my life. My mind whirled, reliving every scene, every revelation. I tried to grasp for words, for some logical explanation, but nothing fit. I began to cry, quietly, quietly. It wasn't physical pain. It was the pain of having returned to a blind world where everyone runs, gets distracted, fights, without knowing what lies behind the veil. In the hospital room, I asked to be alone. I closed my eyes, and there, for the first time after the experience, I asked silently, "Why me?" And again, not with sound but with certainty, the answer came, "Because you could bear to remember." That's when I understood the second shock of the NDE, the loneliness of those who have seen what others cannot yet see. I tried to tell my husband. He listened, but with that look of fear and doubt. I tried to talk to my father, the pastor. He wouldn't listen. He said I was being deceived by the enemy, that God doesn't speak outside the Bible, that there is no truth beyond the word. But you knew, we, and no matter how much the world tried to silence me, I would never fit into that mold again. The trauma of returning wasn't physical, it was spiritual. It was like being expelled from paradise and waking up in a theater where everyone pretends to know the plot, but no one knows who wrote the script. From that moment on, my life was never the same. I was alive, but I carried inside me the death of everything I once believed in. It didn't take long for the world to start reacting to the new Rachel, and not in a kind way. The first time I spoke publicly about my NDE was in a short video, recorded with a trembling voice, my gaze lost between two worlds. I spoke little. I only said that I saw a light, that I was not judged, and that I discovered that God's love had nothing to do with the fear the church teaches us. The reaction was brutal. Comments like daggers. "You have been deceived by demons. This is the work of the devil disguised as an angel of light. You are blaspheming and will burn in hell." People who had known me since childhood began to avoid me. My evangelical aunts started sending me warning messages, videos of pastors, and passages from the Bible. And the hardest part was hearing my father say for the last time, "You are spiritually dead. For me, you are lost." But how can we explain to someone who has never left their body what it is like to be out of their body? How do you tell someone who only knows prison what it means to be free? The saddest thing wasn't being rejected. It was realizing how many people live imprisoned in a lie, and defend that prison as if it were home. I also started receiving other messages from anonymous, quiet people who wrote to me in secret. Rachel, I always suspected. I also had a similar experience, but I'm afraid to talk about it. Your story made me cry. I needed to hear it. That's when I understood. My mission wasn't to convince the fanatics. It was to reach those who, silently, already felt that something was wrong. There were many, hundreds, thousands, people awakening from within their own religions, hearing their souls cry out beneath the hymns, the cults, the veiled threats of eternal punishment. The church's farce is not faith. Faith is legitimate. It has pulsed within human beings since the beginning of time. The farce is fear, the manipulation, the idea that you need to follow human rules to please a divine consciousness that already loves you just the way you are. After the NDE, something in me broke. But instead of the crack, a bridge was born. A bridge between two worlds, that of matter and that of spirit, that of doctrine and that of feeling. And if I had to die for a few minutes to remember who I am, then so be it. What I saw there wasn't religion. It was raw, immense and liberating truth. And it is this truth that I now carry in my eyes. All my life, I was taught that God was up there, separate, unreachable, seated on a throne, noting our mistakes with a golden quill and a stern expression. I was taught that he had rules, and that his love was conditional on my obedience. But what I saw in my NDE tore that concept into irreparable pieces. God was not above. It was in everything. He did not speak with a voice of thunder. He whispered tenderly. He didn't record sins. He welcomed wounds. On that other side, I felt God as a field of intelligent and living love, who knew me better than I knew myself. He, or she, didn't want me to be perfect. He wanted me to be authentic, true, free. And then, something even more surprising was shown to me. God was not a Christian, not a Jew, not a Muslim, not a Hindu, not an atheist. God was all forms of sincere searching, all tears shed in silence, all healing hugs, all anonymous gestures of compassion. And in that moment, I understood the reason for my silent rebellion as a child. I remember the times I left church services crying without knowing why, the sermons that caused me anguish instead of peace, the questions that never left me alone. Why would a loving God send billions of people to hell? Why are we born into different religions if only one is the right one? And why does faith need fear to work? There, in the heart of the universe, all this vanished like smoke. There is no true religion. There is truth within everyone. And when she awakens, no doctrine is able to imprison her again. I also saw in that same space of light, children who had died young, animals, souls of all colors, origins, languages, and they were all the same, not in what they lived, but in what they were. Sparks of the same whole, parts of an infinite consciousness that breathes through us. I returned with the certainty that God's name is not Jehovah, Allah, or Elohim. God's name is life, and every beat of our heart is an unspoken prayer. Everything changed after that. But the biggest shock was this. God was never what they preached to me, and the greatest proof of this is that the moment I truly met him, I didn't feel afraid. I felt at home. When I woke up in the hospital, my eyes swollen from crying and my chest still throbbing with the vibration from the other side, one phrase echoed in my mind like a mantra. You saw, and now you need to live up to what you saw. That phrase haunts me to this day. Returning to this world after touching eternity is like trying to breathe underwater. Everything here seems limited, dense, small. The rush of people, the political discussions, the repeated sermons in churches, guilt disguised as regret, fear disguised as faith. Everything sounds false, shallow. I tried, I swear, to try to get back to normal. I went to church. I sat on a bench. I sang the same hymns from childhood. But it was like reciting a poem backward. Nothing made sense anymore. How can we fit back into a place where truth has been amputated? And that's when I accepted. I was no longer going back to my old life. I was being born again. And this new birth had no ritual, no baptism, no applause. It was solitary, silent, profound, but absolutely real. I began writing down everything I remembered from the NDE, the sensations, the words spoken to me, the images I saw, and most importantly, what I felt, because the deepest truth did not come in phrases, but in vibrations that still live within me today. Today, I understand that my mission was never to convert anyone. My role is just remember whoever wants to remember that there is something beyond fear, beyond guilt, beyond holy books and holy vestments. The truth is not outside. It lives inside, and it burns silently until the day it explodes. As it exploded in me on that operating table, I died for almost 3 minutes, and in 3 minutes, everything I had spent 30 years believing in fell apart. Today, I walk with the peace of someone who no longer needs religious approval, with the courage of someone who was called a heretic and responded with compassion, with the firmness of someone who has been face to face with what men call God and discovered that there is too much love to fit into any church. I don't know how much time I have left in this life, but I know that every second now has a purpose. If I can leave one last message, it is this: spiritual truth does not need a pulpit to be proclaimed. She lives where there is love, where there is freedom, where there is courage to feel, and heaven begins when you stop being afraid of it. If you enjoyed this beautiful spiritual testimony, please leave a like, comment, share your impressions, subscribe to the channel, and don't forget to turn on the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.